All right, welcome back everyone. Go ahead and grab your seats, pull out those notebooks, and let's get right into it. I am super thrilled you're here today because, well, we're tackling one of the absolute most dynamic and consequential eras in our entire curriculum. Today's explainer is U.S. History 10.12, Latino Activism. We're going to be exploring exactly how early agricultural labor movements evolved into this massive, nationwide push for civil rights and political power. It's an incredible story of resilience, organization, and just profound demographic shifts that, honestly, are still actively shaping our country today.
But first, real quick, a little bit of classroom housekeeping. Just check the board for this week's announcements. If you need to do any exam makeups or retakes, you've got to see me during lunch. Today is the absolute deadline for assignment 10.8, and tomorrow is the cutoff for 10.9. Remember, Monday through Wednesday we are working on our big essay, and look at that fourth bullet point, guys. We literally only have 19 classes left until the Regents exam. Time is totally flying, so we've got to stay focused. Oh, and finally, next Friday is our unit exam. Okay, business out of the way, let's look at today's roadmap.
So, here is our lesson plan for today's explainer. Number 1, demographic shifts. Number 2, the Bracero program. Number 3, labor strikes and Cesar Chavez. Number 4, the Chicano power movement. And finally, number 5, our exit ticket review. Let's dive right in.
Section 1, demographic shifts and exactly why this matters. You know, I always like to start by asking, why does this matter, right? Because history isn't just about memorizing old dates. It is about understanding the foundation of the world you actually live in right now. Just look at the sheer scale of the demographic shift in this data from the Pew Research Center. Back in 1970, the U.S. Hispanic population was sitting right around 9.6 million. Over the next 50 years, just look at that trajectory line. It climbs so rapidly and consistently, reaching over 62 million by the 2020 census. That is explosive, sustained growth. But to really wrap our heads around the impact, we've got to look toward the future.
111.2 million. Just let that number sink in for a second.
According to the U.S. Census Bureau, those projections are heading toward a staggering 111.2 million mark by the year 2060. And if you look down at the percentages at the bottom, that means growing from about 18% of the country's total population back in 2017 to an estimated 28% by 2060. We are talking about more than 1 in 4 Americans. You simply cannot understand modern American politics, culture, or economics without understanding the history of this demographic, period.
Now, you might be wondering, where exactly is this population concentrated? Well, this map from the 2020 census lays it out pretty clearly for us. The darkest areas, so the ones representing the highest percentages, they're in Puerto Rico, New Mexico, California, Texas, and Arizona. We're talking over 15 million people in California alone and over 11 million in Texas. The geography here is absolutely crucial because as we turn back the clock today to study the history, these exact states, especially out in the Southwest, are exactly where the seeds of Latino labor activism were first planted.
Section 2, the Bracero program and the roots of labor. So, to trace the roots of this activism, we really need to jump into a time machine back to the 1940s, right during a massive global crisis. During World War II, the United States was facing this severe domestic labor shortage because, of course, millions of men were off fighting. To keep our agricultural industry from just totally collapsing, the U.S. government initiated the Bracero program. It was designed to legally import Mexican farm workers on temporary contracts. Now, on paper, this program guaranteed decent living conditions and a minimum wage. However, it was incredibly strict. It only allowed men, so no families could come along, and it legally mandated that they return to Mexico the second their contracts expired. But as historians, we know there's usually a pretty vast gap between a government guarantee on paper and the reality on the ground, right? The reality for these workers was often grueling labor, really substandard housing, and widespread exploitation.
And the demand for these workers? It was absolutely insatiable. Take a look at this actual newspaper clipping from the Northwest Farm News from September 1943. It says, Mexican workers wanted in October. Farmers in Washington state alone placed orders for 6,000 imported workers for just a single month. This program ultimately brought millions of workers into the U.S. over its lifespan. And despite that strict rule requiring them to return to Mexico, a lot of them actually ended up staying, putting down roots, and forming the absolute backbone of the American agricultural workforce, a workforce that, at the time, was largely unprotected and incredibly vulnerable to exploitation.
Section 3, labor strikes and Cesar Chavez, organizing the workers.
Okay, so when a workforce is consistently marginalized and exploited, eventually that pressure builds up and action just has to be taken. Before we talk about specific Latino leaders, let's establish a foundational concept of organizing using this famous 1917 cartoon from a publication called Solidarity. Look closely at the image, the hand that will rule the world. It shows this giant fist rising powerfully right out of a huge crowd of individual workers. This perfectly captures the whole essence of a labor union. Think about it. An individual farm worker has virtually zero negotiating power against some massive agricultural corporation. But when those workers bind together into a single unified fist, when they practice solidarity, they can literally shut down entire industries and demand fair treatment.
And honestly, no one understood the absolute power of agricultural solidarity better than Cesar Chavez. Chavez became the iconic figurehead for migrant farm workers. The really crucial thing to understand here is how he chose to fight. He didn't choose armed rebellion or violent uprisings, not at all. His tactics were incredibly disciplined. He was deeply dedicated to strict nonviolent protest, drawing a lot of inspiration from figures like Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr. Chavez utilized these long, strategic marches to gain media attention, he organized massive consumer boycotts, and he coordinated these incredibly powerful labor strikes that hit the growers right where it hurt, their wallets.
You can actually see exactly what this activism looked like in practice right here. Notice Cesar Chavez right there in the middle, alongside other activists holding those signs that read Huelga, which is Spanish for strike, featuring the iconic Black Eagle logo of the National Farm Workers Association. What I really love about this image is the tone. I mean, look at them, they're smiling. They are marching out in the broad daylight wearing suits and everyday clothes. It really shows that nonviolent direct action requires immense courage and discipline. You're standing firm for your rights without ever resorting to hostility. It was an incredibly effective strategy that finally brought national visibility to the everyday plight of the farm worker.
Which brings us to Section 4, the Chicano Power Movement, broadening the fight. So as we roll into the late 1960s and 1970s, the massive success and visibility of Chavez's labor strikes acted kind of like a spark. Actually, scratch that. It was a total awakening that pushed the movement way beyond just the agricultural fields. Let's compare these two phases of activism. On one hand, you've got the initial labor activism led by Cesar Chavez. His goals were super focused: better wages, safer working conditions, and union recognition for farm workers, and he achieved this strictly through nonviolence. On the other hand, a younger generation looked at Chavez's organizing and decided they wanted to broaden the fight. This became the Chicano Power Movement. This was a much wider Mexican-American social and political awakening. Inspired partly by the Black Power movement, this wasn't just about labor anymore, guys. It was about reclaiming cultural identity, demanding better education, fighting police brutality, and securing much broader political representation. And while it definitely still included nonviolent protests, it also encompassed more radical and militant factions who were demanding systemic change immediately.
You can actually see that shift in tone and scope right here in this photograph. These activists are carrying a massive banner reading Chicano Power and La Raza Primero, which translates to the people first or the race first. Notice the setting. This isn't out in some rural grape vineyard. This is an urban march. You see young students, berets, and a distinctly different, more urgent energy than those earlier labor strikes. The movement had successfully bridged the gap from fighting for the rights of the rural worker to fighting for the civil rights of the entire Latino community across American cities.
Okay, Section 5, Exit Ticket Review. Let's test your knowledge.
All right, class, we have covered a ton of ground today in this explainer, from shifting demographics to the fields of California and all the way to the streets of the Chicano movement. Now it is time to see exactly what you've retained. Take a look at the question on the board. This is a classic Regent-style question that you should absolutely expect to see on next week's unit exam. During the 1960s and 1970s, Cesar Chavez worked to unionize migrant farm workers by... Read through your options carefully. Did he do it by A, seizing the land of the lettuce and grape growers? B, securing passage of federal legislation to limit immigration? C, using nonviolent tactics such as boycotts and hunger strikes? Or D, urging growers to reduce the workforce through mechanization? Think back to that slide with all those smiling workers holding the Huelga signs. What was his core philosophy? If you guessed C, you are absolutely correct. Cesar Chavez's legacy is permanently tied to his unwavering commitment to nonviolent tactics. Even when he was faced with intimidation or violence from growers or local authorities, he insisted his movement rely entirely on peaceful marches, national consumer boycotts, like the really famous Delano grape strike, and even his own personal hunger strikes to draw moral attention to their cause.
Which brings us to our final thought for today's explainer. We started out today looking at data projecting the Hispanic population to reach over 111 million by 2060. So I'm going to leave you with this question to ponder before the bell rings. As this demographic grows to over 100 million, how will the legacy of these early labor strikes and the broader Chicano movement shape the future of American political power? Remember, the history we study in this room isn't just trapped in the past. It is actively molding the world that you are about to inherit. Think about that tonight while you're working on those essays. Great job today, everybody, and I will see you all tomorrow.